In today's video, we are going to be coloring up these sweet treats, but no markers are needed. Instead, we are going to be coloring them and adding the shading using our blending tools and our ink pads. Hi everyone, I'm Mindy Eggen and welcome to my channel. If you're interested in anything that I use today in the video, it will be linked down below in the video description. A look at the main supplies that I'm going to be using today is this large sweet treats stamp set. Now that can be used for Valentine's, birthday, anniversary. There's so many things that we can use these sweet treats for. There is also a coordinating die and the coloring stencil, which is what I'm going to be using. Now, I had just shown there on screen how I laid out these stamps about where I wanted them to go on the card front. So I picked out my images, decided what I wanted to use, and then I'm stamping them in a light gray ink onto Hammermill cardstock. This is a typical thing that I do whenever I am going to use coloring stencils. I'm going to remove my cardstock, but I'm leaving these stamps in place in my Misti tool. Now I'm placing that cardstock onto my large craft tacky mat from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to start coloring in the image. Now I love using my alcohol markers. I have a lot of them from different companies, and I do love them. But there are times where I also really love using the coloring stencils because they make it so easy. And honestly, for me, it is very therapeutic. So I had started in coloring in the treat bag using seafoam ink and a detail blending tool. Now, honestly, I probably should have done the bag last, but that's okay. I can come back to it. Now I'm going to color in the candies that are in this treat bag. And since the sentiment that I picked out has to do with chocolate, I'm going to keep these chocolate. I'm just going to try and do different shades. Now, the first shade I did there for this layer of the stencil was cappuccino. And then I'm going to come around the very outer edges with mocha. And you can see with the movement of my hand, I'm not using a circular motion. I'm literally kind of tracing around the outer edges of those chocolates. Now I moved to the next set of candies that are in that bag. That one I did in latte. And then I'm going to go around the outer edges with cappuccino. So each time I'm taking it a shade or two darker. And even if it looks intense right away, keep in mind that most inks will dry back a little bit. On a couple of those candies, there are two little hearts, so I am just using cherry ink for that. And I will say that although I love having large or the full size ink pads for doing my blending of backgrounds, I love using the mini ink cubes for things like this because it's a lot easier to really have them out on my desk and move them around. And this is where I brought that bag stencil back in and went around those edges again with that seafoam ink. Because really, if the candies are in the bag, the blue would kind of be overlapping the chocolate color more than the chocolate overlapping the blue, if that makes sense. For the bow, I think this is the peony ink, and that came in a lot stronger than I had anticipated. So I'm going to come around the outer edges with a rose, which I think is the next step in that kind of color combination or that trio. The rose wasn't enough of a punch for me because I knew it was going to dry back. So I decided to bring in cherry ink, which is actually out of a whole different trio, but it really does the great job of getting kind of the outline or the shadowing of my bow. And although this might look a little odd at first, keep in mind that I am going to be taking this back to my Misti tool so I can stamp those outlines again in black. One of the main reasons I don't do that a lot is I either have to wait for ink to dry, and I'm just not really a patient person. I find that if I just stamp in a light gray or even a light brown and then do my ink blending and go back and stamp, I just get better results. And it is very, very few times where I put it back and then misstamped. I don't even remember a time that I've done it recently because I've kind of gotten into that habit of really making sure that my cardstock is always in the same position so I can restamp it and have it line it up perfectly. Now I'm working through my cupcakes, and on this particular one, I did, I believe, butter for one of the cupcakes, like the actual batter part of it or the cupcake part. And I didn't really like the yellow. And plus, since I picked out a sentiment that has to do with chocolate, I figured I better really just stick to the chocolate theme. So I lined that stencil back over the top and went over it with, I think it was the cappuccino and the mocha. Now, on the last cupcake, this one is where I kind of fell in love with a new color combination. So I started out with Cheeky ink, and then I'm going to go around to the edges with Cherry. And these are from two different trios, but I really loved kind of that peachy pink in the center with that dark red outline. So I'm going to kind of just store that away in my memory for right now, and I'm going to be using it in my background. I'm going to continue working through my cupcake, doing the cappuccino and the mocha, adding that shading. And you may notice that I do have quite a few different type of blending tools in this video, but for me with blending tools, it's very much like a watercolor artist where they have a specific brush with that has specific uses. And that's how I feel about blending brushes is each one has a specific need or a use when I'm ink blending. It really just all depends on the image and the results that I want to achieve. So I'm finishing up here with my heart at the top of my cupcake. Again, I went back to that cheeky ink for the heart and then the outline with the cherry ink. Then once I'm done, I'll just remove my stencil and also the cardstock and place it back into my Misti tool, which this particular Misti, I do have a sticky mat from Waffle Flower in there to help grip my cardstock. Now I'm inking up my images with the Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink, and this is going to bring all of those lines kind of back to the forefront. I have some room up on top. There's some open space, so I am going to stamp the sentiment "Love You." And I really love this kind of bubbly font. It reminds me of a font that I used to just kind of mess around with in school to write bubble letters, our name in bubble letters and things. So thought it was a really cool font. Then I will use the coordinating dies to die cut out all three of the images and also the sentiment, and I'm holding them down with my Post-it tape. I'll now work on my background. So I have a piece of Hammermill cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I laid out the design to make sure that that was still what I wanted to do. And I'm going to start out with that cheeky ink and a large blending brush. So this color, I am going to bring almost all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to have it fade off into white because that is where all of my treats are going to be. And then I'm going to bring in that cherry ink. Now, because I'm using like this super large, floofy, fluffy blending brush, it does take a little bit more work to get that intense color, but this does provide a really nice kind of gradation going down. I just love that cherry with the cheeky ink. I have one more sentiment that I want to stamp on here, and this one I do actually want to stamp it directly onto my card front since that kind of bottom portion of my card is a lighter color. The black sentiment or the sentiment stamped in black is going to stand out really well. So I lined everything up about where it was going to go so I knew where I could place that smaller sentiment, and then I'm going to stamp that in the Versafine ink. There is a lot more that I probably could have done to this background, whether it be maybe stamping in a watermark ink or adding splatters, but sometimes I really do love the simplicity of things. So I placed everything down on the card front the way the place that I wanted it to go. And my bag of treats is going to go in the very back. So I am just adding that with some liquid glue. It does kind of break my heart a little bit that I covered up part of the treats, but I think the whole collection of it all still looks super sweet. Now, my cupcakes, I tried to place the larger one more towards the back so that it didn't kind of take over the other cupcake. And then I'm adding them with thin foam squares and the liquid glue. I'll then flip that over and trim off any excess that's hanging over the edge. And then I could add my sentiment with some thin foam squares and a little dab of liquid glue there since it's going to overlap my treat bag just a little bit. I couldn't resist adding some sparkle to these confetti pieces on the cupcakes, so I am doing that with the Glossy Accents and the Prisma Glitter, just sprinkling that on and then tapping off any excess. And one last thing that I want to do to this is I am taking a white gel pen and I am going over some of those lines that the stamp provided to add little highlights to my bow. I also added it to the heart and then to the cupcake wrapper as well. That was such a fun way to color in my sweet treats. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I have another video here that I think you might also enjoy.